The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said after he was safely out of office that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest-level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too-big-to-fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, the proof that facts still matter. This only 25% of Americans support the Republican tax plan, and only 16% believe it will lower their taxes, according to a new Quinnipiac poll. Do you approve or disapprove of the Republican tax plan? Only 25% approve. Do you think the Republican tax plan will increase your taxes, reduce your taxes, or have no impact? Only 16% say it'll lower their taxes. This is an important thing for a couple of reasons. I think at some core level, we intuitively know that this is wrong, right? The cutting taxes for extraordinarily wealthy people and insanely rich corporations at a time when the United States is experiencing the highest inequality, or in the top three, the highest inequality in the world, is just absolutely wrong. I mean, it's just crazy. And yet, that's what we're doing. That's the direction we're going. Tell me how this makes any sense. I don't get it. There's a fascinating piece Keith Payne published over at Common Dreams, and it's about diets. But it is like super relevant here. It's actually about tax plans too. And what he points out is that we have had all these kind of fad diets in the United States, and they've all been based on geography, right? We had the Mediterranean diet. Hey, you want to live long? All those people who live in the Mediterranean, they live well into their 80s and 90s. You can too. Just eat a lot of feta cheese and olive oil and drink a little red wine or Retsina. The Japanese diet. The Japanese have the longest lifespan in the world. Is that because they eat a lot of fish? Then there's the Nordic diet, which is filled with fish and dairy. And dairy's not supposed to be good for you. But Sweden and Norway are in the top 5 in the world in terms of longevity. The French live some of the longest lives on Earth. The oldest known person was Jeanne Clement, a French woman, or Jeannie Clement, a French woman who lived to 122 and a half. So, but they look at, but nobody's saying, hey, you should eat the French diet because it's all full of fat and cheese and butter, and in fact, they call it the French paradox. What's going on with the French diet? We don't understand it. Oh, it must be all that red wine the French drink. That's why they live so long. But here's the problem. Canada and Germany have long lifespans, longer than us, just like the French, just like the Mediterranean countries, just like the Scandinavian countries. And yet nobody is saying, hey, we all should start eating poutine, right? The French Canadian, or schnitzels. Yes, we need more sausages. Be like Germans. Schnitzels and beer for breakfast. Now, I'm slightly exaggerating, but so why aren't we saying that about Germany and Canada since they live longer than us? Well, I guess their food is unique, but who would want to eat it, right? Not to totally knock Canada and Germany, but I lived in Germany for a year, and it was not the easiest place to get a good meal. I mean, everything was meat and potatoes. So it turns out, what is the actual variable here? Well, to quote Keith Payne, medical evidence suggests the differences in lifespans across countries are better explained by social conditions than diet. Researchers have found that among economically developed countries, income inequality is a major predictor of longevity. In fact, the most equal nations are Japan, Sweden, and Norway, which also have the longest lifespans. Not far behind are the Mediterranean nations, including Spain, Greece, and Italy. And no coincidence that all these countries have had these fad diets. So we look at these countries and we say, wow, people really live long in these countries. Maybe we should eat just like they do. Turns out we should have a tax policy just like theirs. That's the one thing they all have in common. All of these countries have relatively high taxes on rich people, relatively low taxes on working people and poor people. They all have single-payer healthcare systems. They all have a strong social safety net. If you fall, you get caught by your country, by everything. And yet, despite being the richest country on Earth, we are way behind we're even behind Ireland and Greece in terms of lifespan. And people aren't saying, hey, Guinness and potatoes. Last year, American life expectancy actually decreased. Last year, we also saw another increase in inequality in the United States. You saw the articles, recently that came out that said 3 people, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and I forget who the third was, but it, another one of our billionaires. These 3 billionaires here in the United States have more money than the bottom half of the United States. Now, you remember 6 months or a year ago? It was the top 20 Americans have as much income or have as much wealth as the bottom half of Americans. Remember 2 or 3 years ago? It was the top 200 Americans had as much wealth as the bottom half. We are moving in the wrong direction, and doing so quickly. We don't need to adopt the diet, the Mediterranean diet, or you don't need to start eating feta cheese and olive oil. You don't need to start drinking red wine. Instead, what we need to do is we need a tax policy that reduces inequality. Very simple, very straightforward, got to do it if we want to have, a decent lifespan. Washington State University. This, by the way, this is not just limited to right now, right here. I mean, there's a huge arc of history that portrays this whole thing. Washington State University and 13 other institutions have been looking into prehistory, right? Societies before what we call modern civilization. Hunter-gatherer societies and pastoralists, people who are, herd animals or work with large herds of animals, like many Native Americans did with the buffalo, even though they didn't specifically herd them. There was their food supply, or a principal part of it. And they looked at this and they said that the arc of prehistory, this is from Science Daily, out of Washington State University, a November 15th press release, The headline, Rising Inequality Charted Across Millennia. Findings have profound implications for contemporary society. And it says the researchers saw disparity in wealth mount. Researchers saw disparities in wealth mount with the rise of agriculture, specifically the domestication of plants and large animals, and increased social organization. And they note inequality repeatedly leads to social disruption and even collapse. This is Tim Kohler. He's the lead author and Regents Professor of Archaeology and Evolutionary Anthropology at Washington State University. The United States, he noted, currently has one of the highest levels of inequality in the world. They looked at 63 archaeological sites or groups of sites. And what they found was the lowest wealth disparity and the highest quality of life and lifespan were among hunter-gatherer societies. Then it became horticulturists, small-scale, low-intensity farmers. They had a slightly higher level of inequality. And then, of course, the highest was advanced agricultural societies with a median score, the Gini coefficient of 0.35. Here in the United States, our inequality is 0.85. It's the worst in the world. And therefore, gee, we're sick. Anyhow, we'll be back. Stick around. Coming up on 15 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
You know what? I watched this election go, and 3 weeks ago, I knew how it was going to go.
Yeah.
Because I knew what some parts of America wanted.
Well, I knew it was possible,
honesty.
and throughout this election, I got a note from another talk show host over the weekend titled Apology. And he said, you know, when I had you on my show a couple of months ago, and you said that it was possible that Trump could win, I was absolutely shocked, and I never believed it, and you were right. And you know, I take no, and I've been saying that all along. You know, it's why I've been, you know, pushing people to get out and vote for Clinton, even though she wasn't my first choice, because I thought that Trump actually had a good chance of winning. I mean, I know Middle America. I grew up in Michigan. Back to you, Barbara. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Excuse me. Here's one thing that I really want America to pay attention to. When people say the popular vote don't count, yes, it does. For as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump is not my president. I will never call him President Trump.
Yeah.
His band of bigots that run with him, that's their problem. But the people that voted for Donald Trump, they are fixing to find out the hard way. And I'm not going to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
Second of all, I praise my president, Barack Hussein Obama, for the dignity, the grace, and the honor that he showed to a man that demeaned him every step of the way. This is why the man has a Nobel Peace Prize. See, America doesn't know this about our president. Donald Trump is going to try to use some of his programs and make them his. Mitch McConnell is smiling. Paul Ryan is smiling. But I'm here to tell them, we are America. I am black. I'm not scared of any man, with a sheet or without a sheet. Do not walk up on me and go to talking out the side of your head, because I'm not going to take it. I'm an American. My father fought for this country. My brother fought for this country. My uncle fought for this country. I am an American, and you're not going to tell me what I can and cannot say, and you're not going to tell me that I can and cannot protest. To the children of America, keep marching. Don't quit marching. Keep marching. Let this man know, no.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. In fact, I had intended to open the show by talking about the marches all over the country, and I got mentally derailed. I've got to get back to that as soon as the break is over, you know, or at the next break. But I think you're absolutely right, Barbara, and obviously you're a courageous person. Good on you for saying it. I
mean it with all my heart. I literally mean it with all my heart. Yeah. This is my doggone country, and no plutocrat or whatever they want to call themselves is going to stand and tell me how I can and can't live in my country. Yeah. God bless America. America's great, and America, keep fighting. Yeah. Keep fighting on. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Barbara. Well said. Well said. And this is what I'm calling on Chuck Schumer to do, is to say no to everything they bring forward. It's going to take 60 votes to pass anything through this, or it should. This is. Keep in mind, for the last 8 years, and the press never even commented on this, by the way. You know, the extension of long-term unemployment insurance. It had enough votes to pass the Senate, but it was filibustered by the Republicans. The press didn't even mention. They just said, "Oh, they failed to hit the 60-vote limit." Now, when the Democrats do that, is the press going to say, "Oh, the Democrats filibustered it"? I'm guessing they probably will, because our press in this country is largely right-wing and Republican. Believe that.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The core issue of inequality. This is a big one. This is a genuinely big one, a big issue. And the Republicans right now are proposing to make it worse, right? I mean, they're just totally in the bag for the donor class, for the conservative billionaires who have billions or hundreds of millions, the multimillionaires, but want more and more and more and more. This is a cultural illness. This is something that, in any indigenous society on earth. In other words, the way that you and I, all of our ancestors lived for over 200,000 years. The way that human society developed, the way that human society evolved, the way that human society grew and survived was through egalitarian social structures, was through the idea that we're all in this together. That there's no them and, well, there's a them and us, but it's not like them should be wiped out and we should conquer. That was an absolutely alien idea in most Aboriginal and Indigenous societies. In other words, throughout the vast majority of the history of the human race. It not only was considered a bizarre idea, it was considered a pathology. It was considered an illness. The late Professor Jack Forbes of UC Davis, a Native American professor of Native American Studies, as I write about at some length in my book, Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, he talked about Wetiko. This is I think it's a Lakota word, it's a Native American word in any case, that means those who eat the lives of others. It loosely translates into cannibal. And Jack Forbes wrote a book called Columbus and Other Cannibals, which I believe is still in print, even though Jack Forbes has passed away. And it lays out, the crimes of Christopher Columbus, but it also lays out the First Nations worldview, the First Nations view of our society, of so-called Western society. How is this? How does this happen? What's going on here? And basically the worldview of these First Nation countries is that acquisition of wildly more than you need, maybe a little more than you need, that's okay, but wildly more than you need, that's considered mental illness.
And that mental illness, which Jack Forbes said the Native American name for was Wetiko, was a mental illness that was brought from Europe to North America. And it fills our culture, your and my culture, and gave us the rationale. I was going to say gave us the means, arguably technology did that, but gave us the rationale for murdering other people. For a massive genocide of Native Americans. Perhaps as many as 100 million Native Americans have been killed in the last 400, 500 years. A horrific enslavement process of people of African ancestry. The whole idea of indentured servitude, all of this, the worst parts of what we refer to as capitalism, because yes, slavery was arguably the most profitable capitalist institution running in 1776. And you look at all of this stuff, and this is the consequence of a small number of individuals, 2, 3, 4% of the population, who, or less, actually. I mean, it's the top 1%, right? Well, it's not really even the top 1%. To be in the top 1%, you only have to make $300,000 a year. I realize I say only 300. A lot of people are going, hey, I'd kill for 300,000. But it's not a billion, right? It's not the 20 guys on Wall Street who made over $1 billion last year. It's not the CEO of United Healthcare who's taken over $1 billion in his the last couple decade and a half. It's not that. So with this knowledge that mental illness has driven the destruction of our culture and our society, a mental illness that explicitly says greed is good, a mental illness that embraces hierarchy, patriarchy, and inequality, a mental illness that is driven by a very small number of people who have used that mental illness, that hoarding syndrome, essentially. If these people had not been born to great wealth in the first place, or had figured out a way to acquire it by, right time, right place. Hey, you're there when Apple's doing its first IPO. If they had not been in those situations, they'd be the ones on TV with an apartment full of tin cans and newspapers. They would be hoarders. And they are hoarders, but instead they're hoarding money. And those people own the Republican Party. And so you've got all these people in the Republican Party who are not multimillionaires or billionaires, but elected officials, but they owe their career and their future and a lot of spiffs to these individuals who do suffer from this hoarding complex, this OCD mental illness, applied to money. And they're changing the rules of the economic and political game constantly to make things even worse. To make inequality worse, to give the very wealthy among us more and more power. I mean, all of these things, it's really in a way breathtaking. But I think it's really important to think of it in those terms as well. So that there is this really serious problem right now with great wealth corrupting our political system. The Supreme Court has been a part of it. So I guess the question is, what do we do about it? We'll be right back. We're reading today from the... And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm, a sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the storm for the presidency. Here with you for what it's worth, Sean. I can't hear myself in my own headset, in my own IFB. Okay, you know that, good. Steve in Conifer, Colorado. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. How are you today?
Steve?
Tom, the reason I was calling you is I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I think
I'm not hearing Steve, so I'm going to put Steve on hold. He's on line 3. We'll try Vera in Seattle. Vera, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I just don't have any audio at all in my...
I can hear them.
You can hear her?
I was calling about the
I can't.
Football players kneeling.
I wonder if... No,
and I'm
doesn't do it.
74 years old. And all my family members have
hear
been in the Marines. And
okay, we got to figure this out. Vera, I'm going to put you back on hold. Apparently, you can hear me, and I can't hear you. We've got a problem with our mixing board this morning, our audio mix board, and in fact, we haven't been able to deliver the show to our commercial stations right now. They're all hearing it best of. But our engineer is on the way, and so I will pick up your phone calls when we get to that. And so let me go back to some of these other stories that, I think are things of considerable consequence that we need to be paying attention to and talking about. Lindo Jones. Now, apparently there was nobody there with a video camera. And it's interesting. There was that, period of time, and I whether it was 6 months or a year and a half or a couple it seems like maybe it was about 2 years there where all these videos were coming out about, of police killing people. And it produced this, very strong backlash to that. And we haven't seen any of these videos recently. And I'm wondering, is it that they're not happening anymore? Is it that the police are getting really good at preventing people from taking pictures? Is it that they're taking people's cameras away from them after they do? Or is it that the cops have stopped killing people? Well, it's definitely not that the cops have stopped killing people. Police killings are pretty much the same rate right now that they've been for the last few years. And here, one more time, this is Lindo Jones. This was back in November 8th, about a week ago. And he was in the 1300 block of Southtown East Boulevard in Mesquite, Texas. A young black guy. And he was trying to get into his own pickup truck, right? And the alarm went off. And I don't know how how the alarm went off or what happened, but he was trying to turn off his car alarm. Police showed up and shot him twice. Then they took him to the hospital where they put him under arrest with no criminal charges, chained him to the hospital bed, denied him family and attorney visits while being, quote, unconstitutionally questioned by the department that shot him. This guy owned the truck he was trying to open when the alarm went off, when the police came and shot him twice. He was unarmed. This was around 9 p.m. The responding officer, Derek Wiley, believed Jones was a car burglary suspect. According to police, while officers were responding, the caller said the suspect had broken into a pickup truck and was setting off the vehicle's alarm. Police said the officer confronted Jones and things escalated quickly. Yeah, cop pulled out his gun and shot him twice. I mean, even if he didn't own the car, is being shot the new penalty for car theft? Or attempted car theft? Apparently. In a statement from Jones's attorney, they said he was dealing with a minor car issue after accidentally triggering his alarm and being unable to disable the security system when the police arrived. and then commanded him to step out of his vehicle. When he exited his vehicle, he, quote, tried to explain the issue and was then shot once in the stomach by an unidentified Mesquite police officer. This is according to his attorney, Mr. Moore. Several officers then, I'm quoting from his lawyer, several officers then attacked Mr. Jones and attempted to perform an anal cavity search on the street. Pulled his pants down and tried to perform an anal cavity search. You know what I mean. When he resisted, when he reacted, he didn't even resist, he simply reacted to the unlawful sodomy, he was shot a second time in the back by these police officers. He was then placed under arrest and transported to Baylor Medical Plaza, where he was immediately admitted to the ICU, chained, handcuffed to the bed, with a wound in his stomach and a wound in his back. He has not been, as of this morning, this was a day or two ago, he had not been charged with a crime. Instead, they conveniently charged him with evading arrest. This is nuts. Initially, a misdemeanor. They have since dropped the charge and released him. But this is, I mean, welcome to America. And what part of this has to do with, oh, well, here, this is another one. The police officers said that Jones displayed such physical strength he had to be held down by 3 officers. Now, this is while they were trying to pull his pants down and shove their fingers up his butt. But which I would say was not an anal cavity search. I would say it was absolute sexual violence being directed against a young man of color by police officers in Texas. I mean, the car alarm goes off. Is that a reason to drag the guy out in the street, pull his pants down, and check out his butt? Really? And this whole, black men are so powerful, oh my God, it took 3 officers to hold him down. This is the worst kind of stereotypes. No officers were injured, KDFW-TV reports. Police also implied that Jones' strength was amplified for some reason without providing any evidence, like, oh yeah, he was on, some amazing new drug that turns you into the Incredible Hulk. No. As the author of this piece here, this is Tom Cleary, writing for Heavy.com. Tom Cleary writes, I think that I'm not an expert on humans. I'm not an expert on human strength, but I think if someone has been shot and handcuffed on the ground and it still takes 4 large men to hold him down, there's something going on. The police department said they wanted to prevent him from running off or fighting. No. Forcibly removed from the hospital, given a criminal trespass warning. I mean, this is just, it doesn't get any more bizarre than this. And of course, it's Texas. I mean, this is Sandra Bland country, right? And then finally, this WFAA-TV, police sources told WFAA-TV that there have been questions about whether the shooting was justified. The police department's internal affairs division is inspecting it, but no outside agency is looking at the body cams or the dash cams or any of the other evidence. The department itself is conducting its own review. And, people are now, and the lawyer for this fellow is now asking that the police department publish this information and, get it out. They want it to be released. But he wants it released, his office, the lawyer, so he can prepare a civil suit. And they want a habeas corpus petition granted. The police department says, we'll release this later. At a later date. That's the exact phrase. It's amazing. The police department. We have additional information. In fact, we've got further interviews coming up with the officer involved, and of course, there are others involved. I haven't seen all the footage about the body cam video. This is the police, the chief of police. I haven't seen all the body cam footage, and I don't know exactly what's in all the footage. And until I do, I'm not going to relay that information. I'm not going to try this case in the public media. I'm not just simply going to not do that right now. There are pieces of this investigation that are still under investigation,
When we have all the information, we'll be releasing it. Officer Derek Wiley, the patrol officer, has been placed on administrative leave. I mean, it was just another day in America, right? Just another day in America. And, you know, in my opinion, this goes back to what I opened this hour with, this conversation about how do we create a society that is more egalitarian and less unequal? Because we know that inequality leads to higher levels of crime, drug addiction, mental illness, depression, suicide, you know, just a whole spectrum, divorce, child abuse, spousal abuse, just a whole spectrum, mass killings, a whole spectrum of social ills come out of inequality. And we're having no conversation about that in America right now. And the science is irrefutable. This isn't some crazy Thom Hartmann theory. This is actual science. The more unequal a society is, the more horrors that society experiences. Very simple, very straightforward. And what establishes that inequality? The tax code. And what are the Republicans doing right now? Trying to make things worse. We've got to fight this. You need to contact every elected official you possibly can and every person you know and tell them that the Republican tax scam is only going to make the opiate crisis worse, everything worse. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back in just a minute.
I thought you touched on something that was very, actually, it sparked just good. It was a good analysis that you had, was that minority groups tend to have a level of compassion that the average white person, or particularly white male, actually lacks.
Right.
And I think that may be one of the reasons that there's not a major revolt from particularly the African-American community, but also other minority groups, is because we're always in this constant struggle with trying to get along and have a cooperation and try to convince, you know, the white folks that don't mean harm, but maybe are ignorant to a certain level because they aren't the victim of the white supremacy.
Right, they're blissfully inserted in their privilege.
Exactly. And for me, as an African-American male, sorry to point that out, I know some folks don't like that, but me as an African-American male, going through predominantly white schools growing up, there was one year that I was totally in an all-black school too, but that's a side issue. But going to predominantly white schools and having predominantly white friends, I have noticed that I probably would have been thinking a lot more along the lines of the typical white person because I had to fit in and you know, that's what I knew. But once I got to the age of about 18 and dealt with insanely overt racism from a small percentage of white males, but a very dangerous percentage, even if it's a small amount. I mean, the amount of power that certain police officers have, you know, not most, but I've come across a few of them, and other, I'm sorry to lump them in with white supremacists, but a few of them, they're pretty overt when it's you and when it's a one-on-one situation.
Yep.
And it changes your thinking just literally based on your experience, that you have no choice but to change the way you think. And I'm, you know, sorry for the rant, but...
No, it's an excellent rant, Jay.
I thought I threw that out.
It's an excellent rant, and this is, you know, this is the whole thing about white privilege, is never having to deal with race. It's the biggest bonus for white people of white privilege is that they don't have to think about race, and so they say these stupid things like, I don't think about race, I don't think about color. Well, that's asserting white privilege.
Exactly, and if you walk down the street and somebody else attacks you or approaches you, it's not about what I'm thinking at that moment. It's what is this person thinking about, and why does he have this hostility towards me?
Right.
I have to be aware of that,
Yep.
of that danger. And so I'm forced to think in terms of race, because what I do, my actions can have a detrimental effect to the outcome of my safety or me getting a job or working.
Sure.
Or just
could lead to your death.
Insert any scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent points, Jay. And that was the essence of my point. And this isn't brilliant original thinking on my part at all. There's no shortage of studies that show that the lower a person is on a social or economic power scale, the more empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And the higher somebody is on an economic and power scale, the less empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And it's simply a matter of, it's almost math. It's if you've got that power and you don't have to worry about race, then most people take advantage of that. They don't worry about race, and they use that power. Irrefutable evidence. In the midst of all this absolutely irrefutable evidence that inequality leads to social disasters and more equal societies made more equal by their tax code, which subsidizes and supports people on the bottom end of the economic pyramid and prevents people on the top of the economic pyramid from behaving like super predators. The tax code in the Mediterranean countries, in the Scandinavian countries, in all these countries, in Japan, the Japanese diet, the Japanese people, some of the longest lived people in the world, very, very low rates of some diseases like breast cancer. They think, hey, maybe that has to do with a low meat diet. Maybe it has to do with lots of tofu. Maybe it has to do with inequality being so low in Japan. If you live in Japan, if you're Japanese and you live in Japan, you have a social safety net. You have free health care, you have free education all the way through college. I mean, your housing can be subsidized if you're low income. Japan has a very, very, very healthy social safety net, which was put into place in large part by Harry Truman after World War II. Same thing with Germany. You know, it was the Germans who voted to say, yeah, let's have, didn't just vote, I mean, you know, the whole parliament, let's have a constitution like the one that Harry Truman is suggesting. Harry Truman, of course, was president of the United States after World War II, as Germany was being put back together. So, you know, FDR and Truman proposing to the Germans and the Japanese. I mean, the Japanese would have been entirely Harry Truman. They were not defeated during FDR's lifetime. And the Japanese would, you know, and this, you know, we said to them, well, we said to the Germans, for example, Harry Truman said, I just got labor unions, you know, in 47, labor unions were just eviscerated in the United States with Taft-Hartley, which allows for right to work for less. So what they said is, no, we're gonna change this. We're gonna do something different. We're gonna do it the way that the Germans said. We're gonna do it the way that Harry Truman is suggesting. We're gonna build a strong social safety net, and we're going to empower unions. We're gonna empower unions to the point that we're not just going to give them all the protections that the Wagner Act, the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, carried, which allows people to unionize, gives them the absolute right, protected by the government, to unionize. We're not just going to do that. We're going to require that on the board of directors of any corporation in Germany that has over 1,000 people, that board of directors has to be made up by 50% of it representatives of organized labor from that company. So unions have half the say, 50% of the say in large corporations in Germany. Meanwhile, Germany has another distinction here. This was earlier this year, in March. And again, this got no coverage. In fact, Louise found this morning over at nakedcapitalism.com or .org, whichever it is. But it's Naked Capitalism is the website. And it's a repost of a blog that Lambert Strether wrote in the website Currente. And he points out last March, the country's highest court, the Supreme Court, found that secret computerized vote counting was unconstitutional in March of this year. Unfortunately, it wasn't the U.S. Supreme Court that found that computerized vote counting was unconstitutional. It was Germany's Supreme Court that determined that computerized vote counting was unconstitutional. And they had 5 reasons for this that they laid out, that the Supreme Court in Germany laid out. And these are things that I think, frankly, we should be paying attention to here in the United States. Number 1, they said that specialized technical knowledge cannot be required of the people who are counting the vote. In other words, if you're going to have an election and you're going to count the ballots, it has to be done in a way that anybody can walk in off the street and count the ballots. They don't have to be trained in a special proprietary computer operating system or system to get into the computer and get the data out and all this kind of. No. You look at the ballots, oh, yeah, that's a vote for so-and-so. This is a vote for such and such. You know, let's make 2 piles. I mean, it's got to be, so no specialized knowledge. That was the number 1 thing, the first thing that the German Supreme Court said. You cannot have a voting system where the people who are counting the vote have to have special knowledge in order to count the vote. It should be the sort of thing that any average person can do, number 1. Number 2, the German Constitution requires that the vote count be, quote, publicly observed. Now, you'll remember during the recount down in Florida when after Jeb Bush and Katherine Harris knocked 60, 70, 80,000 African Americans out the voting rolls, getting George W. Bush within 500 votes of being able to throw the race to the Supreme Court, which, of course, is what happened. You'll recall that there were people counting the votes, and then over one shoulder was a Republican observer, and over the other shoulder was a Democratic observer. That's how the German Constitution requires it to be done. And you can't do that with electronic voting machines. So that was the second reason the German Supreme Court said, no, it's unconstitutional. The third is that there's no audit possible with a computerized vote, right? You push the button on the computer and say, print the totals, and it's going to print over and over and over again the exact same stuff. Whatever the data on the computer is, that's it. Number 4, no paper trail. They said the electronic vote counting does not provide a suitable or appropriate paper trail. It's not a paper trail that goes from the hand of the voter to the hand of the counter.
10.
And finally, they said all independent observers conclude that electronic voting machines are totally banned in Germany because no conceivable computerized voting system can cast and count votes that meet these 2 essential requirements, being observable and not requiring specialized technical knowledge. When are we going to do this in the United States? We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Is my mic on? There we go. Okay, welcome back. On the line with us is Governor Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama. His story profiled in the new documentary by Steve Wimberly, Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Don Siegelman. And Governor, welcome back to the program. It's been altogether too long since we've talked to you. Governor?
When I was
there we go.
Solitary confinement for calling your show when I was in prison, and it's now that I'm out, it's there's less likelihood I'll get into trouble, but there's always a chance when talking to you, so that's good.
Oh no, okay. I had been kind of operating on the assumption that there was a kind of a probationary period there where you couldn't talk to the press, and that maybe that had ended. Is that the case, or are we safe to have these conversations?
I was. When I was first released from prison in February, I was under house arrest, and the probation officer wanted to go by, because I was still a federal prisoner, they wanted to use the prison rules, which, as we all know, are interpreted against the inmates. So out of an abundance of caution, I chose to refrain from talking to the media because there was a great likelihood I could be sent back to prison. So,
right.
But now I'm free of that, so I can talk to you, and presumably I won't be sent back to prison for that.
Well, that's great. We have about 5-6 minutes here until we're going to hit a hard break, and I would love to hear your thoughts on A, what's going on politically in Alabama. And B, we just had another mass shooting. We've got serious gun control problems in the United States, or gun problems in the United States. We have wildly more guns per person than pretty much any other country in the world. And that seems to be driving a serious crisis. I'm curious your thoughts on both those issues.
Well, I first became interested and involved in gun control and background checks when my political mentor, Allard Lowenstein, Congressman Lowenstein, was murdered in his law office and by a man who was mentally ill. And at the time, I was Secretary of State, so I brought together all of the elements of needed to reform and change Alabama's background checks, and we were able to put everything on computer so that it would speed up the process of gun dealers being able to access and law enforcement being able to provide information to gun dealers about, who should and shouldn't have weapons. But, that was more of a gesture than anything else, although it did take us one step forward. But, today we still need background checks. We still aren't checking people who buy guns at gun shows. We don't require individuals who transfer weapons to record or register those weapons. And, I grew up in the South where if a young man didn't go hunting, didn't go out rabbit hunting or bird hunting or later deer hunting, then something was wrong with you. But, we had in those days a single barrel, single shot, 16 gauge shotgun or a 410 over and under for rabbit hunting or bird hunting. And, what puzzles me is that animals haven't developed into some weird species. But yet we are selling automatic weapons, and the weapons that we are selling to people as easily as they once could purchase a shotgun are only used and can only be used to kill people. So it makes absolutely no sense to me why we continue to allow these weapons of mass destruction to be sold at Walmart or any other gun shows to anybody who walks up and has the money and can pass the simple test to get one. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, amen. Well said. I'm curious your thoughts on the whole, Alabama politics right now. We've got a somewhat problematic candidate on the Republican side, Mr. Moore, to say the very least. I mean, you were the governor of Alabama. You know Alabama politics inside out. I've only visited the state once or twice in my life. I don't know that much about it. To what extent is Roy Moore a reflection of the past or the current state of the political discourse and politician in Alabama? And where do you see this going?
Well, I think there are several takeaways from this. One, it is a classic setup between a national Democrat who's connected to Obama and Bill Clinton and a Republican who is a Rush Limbaugh conservative. We have Doug Jones, who has never held public office, versus Roy Moore, who has run for office several times statewide and has been elected a couple of times to the state Supreme Court. Doug Jones has no name recognition, while Roy Moore has, probably 98% name recognition. And then you have a disparity in issues where the Democrat, Doug Jones, is in favor of abortions or women's right to choose, and in favor of gay marriages, and the Republican, a West Point graduate, who is opposed to all those things and is supported by evangelicals and the Christian right. It is a classic battle, and the one thing that I hope that we can all learn from this, and not just from the Roy Moore, the bad publicity that is encircling him, but this all of the revelations of misconduct and sexual harassment and sexual assault and criminal acts of sexual behavior, it has to change the paradigm, the mindset of powerful men who take advantage of women who in the workplace. And hopefully it would lead to a change in attitude where men start to value women because of their their intellect and what they can bring to the organization with which they are associated, and are less attracted by the physical attributes and more attracted to their intellectual contributions that can be made. I believe with the pressure that the national media is putting on this issue and the continuous revelations from Bill Cosby to now allegations of misconduct by Al Franken, we have this massive publicity of shockingly, sexual misbehavior, and it has got to lead to a change in attitude of powerful men. And I hope it starts with members of Congress, because they have been notorious for abusing women for decades. I don't know whether you ever read the book or have even heard of it, but a book by Fishbake Miller, who was the clerk of the House back in the 40s and 50s, I guess. And he wrote a tell-all book about members of Congress that he had seen, and it's something that has been going on. It's a culture in Washington, and I think that the way it, hopefully a starting point for stopping this is by Congress beginning to change their own behavior.
Yeah, amen. Former Governor Don Siegelman of Alabama. Governor, it's great having you with us, and free-don.org is still the website, right? Hang on a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And thanks so much, Governor, for being with us. Free-don.us, excuse me. Yeah, thank you, Governor. We'll be ready.
Thank you.
And Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
You know what? I watched this election go, and 3 weeks ago, I knew how it was going to go.
Yeah.
Because I knew what some parts of America wanted.
Well, I knew it was possible, and throughout this election, I got a note from another talk show host over the weekend titled Apology, and he said, when I had you on my show a couple of months ago, and you said that it was possible that Trump could win, I was absolutely shocked, and I never believed it, and you were right. And I take no, and I've been saying that all along. It's why I've been, pushing people to get out and vote for Clinton, even though she wasn't my first choice, because I thought that Trump actually had a good chance of winning. I mean, I know Middle America. I grew up in Michigan. Back to you, Barbara. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Excuse me. Here's one thing that I really want America to pay attention to. When people say the popular vote don't count, yes, it does. For as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump is not my president. I will never call him President Trump.
Yeah.
His band of bigots that run with him, that's their problem. But the people that voted for Donald Trump, they are fixing to find out the hard way. And I'm not going to feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Second of all, I praise my president, Barack Hussein Obama, for the dignity, the grace, and the honor that he showed to a man that demeaned him every step of the way. This is why the man has a Nobel Peace Prize. See, America doesn't know this about our president. Donald Trump is going to try to use some of his programs and make them his. Mitch McConnell is smiling. Paul Ryan is smiling. But I'm here to tell them, we are America. I am black. I'm not scared of any man, with a sheet or without a sheet. Do not walk up on me and go to talking out the side of your head, because I'm not going to take it. I'm an American. My father fought for this country. My brother fought for this country. My uncle fought for this country. I am an American, and you're not going to tell me what I can and cannot say, and you're not going to tell me that I can and cannot protest. To the children of America, keep marching. Don't quit marching. Keep marching. Let this man know, no.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. In fact, I had intended to open the show by talking about the marches all over the country, and I got mentally derailed. I've got to get back to that as soon as the break is over, or at the next break. But I think you're absolutely right, Barbara, and obviously you're a courageous person. Good on you for saying it.
I mean it with all my heart. I literally mean it with all my heart. Yeah. This is my doggone country.
Yeah.
And no plutocrat or whatever they want to call themselves is going to stand and tell me how I can and can't live in my country.
Yeah.
God bless America. America's great, and America, keep fighting.
Yeah.
Keep fighting on. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Barbara. Well said. Well said. And this is what I'm calling on Chuck Schumer to do, is to say no to everything they bring forward. It's going to take 60 votes to pass anything through this, or it should. This is. Keep in mind, for the last 8 years, and the press never even commented on this, by the way. You know, the extension of long-term unemployment insurance. It had enough votes to pass the Senate, but it was filibustered by the Republicans. The press didn't even mention. They just said, well, they failed to hit the 60-vote limit. Now, when the Democrats do that, is the press going to say, oh, the Democrats filibustered it? I'm guessing they probably will, because our press in this country is largely right-wing and Republican. Believe that.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether you're giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
I've run out of things to riff. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I believe I can hear your phone calls now. Carrie in Seattle. Can you hear me, Carrie? Carrie in Seattle?
Hello?
Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, you know, Tom, there was a book written by a classicist named Norman O. Brown during I think it was about 66. The book was around. It was called Love's Body. A lot of people thought it was a porno book, but it was an in-depth study of the human condition, a psychoanalytical and in-depth study of it. Mm-hmm. And he came to the conclusion that if it's a hoarder, a poor hoarder, or a rich
hoarder
guy that's running the show, that this holding on to this money, or he called it filthy lucre. I don't know if I'm pronouncing
lucre,
that right.
I think is how it's pronounced.
It was a fixation he came to the conclusion it was a fixation in the anal stage of development. We never did get through the psychosexual stage of development. So that may explain a lot of things that are going on and why it happened that way. I mean, I can't really. He kind of traced it back to forgetting that we have an androgynous type of body and mentality, and we forgot the feminine part of ourselves, and we divorced ourselves from that. So that's basically what it was about. And I wanted to ask you one more question. Why haven't you in your library have William O. Douglas's Points of Rebellion, one of the best Supreme Court justices there was?
Oh, interesting. I'm unfamiliar with that book, Carrie. The title...
You are? He wrote it in the 60s. It's called Points of Rebellion. He was a Supreme Court, the head Supreme Court. So
right.
You ought to get that book and look it over. He had some Points of Rebellion in there.
Sounds fascinating. I will check it out. Carrie, thanks for the heads up and thanks for the call. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. We were talking about the Bible last week. And I remember you telling a story about a friend of yours, you know, talking about the Cain and Abel story. And I was thinking that fits in pretty good with Prophecy Rock, you know?
With what?
Some of us stayed on the true path and most of us didn't. We went on the chaotic path. Farming could have led us down that chaotic path.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, this is the, you know, Daniel Quinn identified this so well. The indigenous societies, hunting-gathering societies, actually have stories in their cultures warning against doing agriculture because agriculture destroys land and causes population explosions. And they understood this. They had tried it. They had disasters as a consequence of trying it. In fact, it's sort of the cautionary tale even of the Epic of Gilgamesh, how, you know, with growing barley and irrigating it from the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in central Iraq, now they called it Ur and Uruk back then, town of Uruk in the state of Ur, that the salt from the river, you know, I mean, the river water would nourish the plants and then evaporate, but the salts that were carried in the river just accumulated over generations in the land to the point where Iraq, which, you know, prior to its population 7,000 years ago, had been covered with lush forests, is now almost all desert or scrubland, and directly as a consequence of this agricultural overkill. And so the challenge that we have now, I mean, you know, particularly with 6.5 billion people on the planet, that and if we were to go back to a non-intensive agricultural lifestyle, if we were to go back to a pastoralist, a herding lifestyle, or a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the planet could support fewer than 500 million of us. So how do we figure out how to integrate the value system of hunting-gathering people and pastoralists, particularly hunting-gathering people? How do we take this value system, which values egalitarianism and community and you know, all those kind of things? How do we impose that or infect that value system into our contemporary society, into a fundamentally agriculture-based society? And I think the way that we do that is by specifically making these you know, pieces of an egalitarian worldview part of our cultural norms. And I think that we're moving in that direction, frankly. I think we're moving in that direction very rapidly right now with regard to the equality of power between men and women. And you're seeing this in everything from, you know, you know, Al Franken now being accused of sexual harassment to, you know, obviously Roy Moore and whatnot. And it's, you know, I think people are saying, oh, okay, well, you know, here's a, I shouldn't say people. Some men are saying, oh, here's a new standard of behavior that I have to conform to. And I see that as a good thing. I think that we've seen the same thing in my lifetime with the way, the culturally and socially acceptable way in most of American society that white people deal with people of color. So, you know, I'm actually quite optimistic, Paul, you know, out of all this stuff. But I think that your point is really well taken, and that those values of egalitarianism that most hunting-gathering people, women have, they're not. Yeah, obviously, we're not. Men and women are not equal, but in terms of power relationships, they are absolutely equal. You know, they're just different areas of responsibility and power. So you nailed it, Paul. And I think, frankly, the story of Cain and Abel is a warning against agriculture. But here we are, so how do we figure out how to make it work for us?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls right after this. This is a fascinating piece in The Guardian. What if nature, like corporations, had the rights of a person? And you know, without going through the whole argument, the Te Uruwera Act is a law that was passed in New Zealand back in 2014, 2 years ago, and it extended to a 821 square mile forest the legal rights of personhood. The forest is sacred to the Tuho people, an indigenous group of the Maori, and for them, Te Tura was an ancient and ancestral homeland that breathes life into their culture. The
Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You have reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea and the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches. Bits have fallen off in neat rectangles. Clearly, trickle-down hadn't worked. But gush-up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a ghost story by Arundhati Roy.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think. Where am I? There I am. I'm not getting any music. How about that? No, yeah, the music is all over now, Nate. You were a few minutes late. So, Carol in Ramona, California. Carol, can you hear me?
I think you are...
Or Conrad, I'm sorry.
That's right. I was tearing my hair out the other day when you were talking with all union guys, and they kept using that right to work mantra over and over again. I got a substitute for it. It's work in poverty state.
Yeah, although that's not the name of the legislation that the Republicans have been pushing. So.
Right, yeah. And second thing, a few months ago you were asking for a name to call these multi-million-dollar news anchors who, they'll never tell the truth because then their big paycheck will end. If you get to see the first movie in the series, Hunger Games, they have these kind of a media television hosts. So I was thinking of that are just ridiculous, and I was thinking of we could call them mincing Hunger Game hosts.
Hunger Game hosts. Yeah, sadly, I mean, this is the one of the consequences of inequality is you end up with something that very much resembles the Hunger Games. Conrad, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today, other than industrial hemp? Or is that what you called about? I think you called about the media, right?
Yeah, you were talking about the media a while ago being essentially owned by the right wing, and I wouldn't disagree with you too much, although I think what we hear is this manufactured perception of centrist middle ground, which is then criticized by the political right wing as liberal, while that manufactured perception in the middle, mucky political middle ground does not allow for any discussion of the alternative societies and ways and means by which people would go about small business, small farms and gardening and such that I won't get into because you asked me not to, and so forth and so on, solar, wind, etc. So, yeah, it's a manufactured perception.
Yeah.
Naomi Klein describes, she's kind of coming from a point of view like when she says she didn't realize what was going on. Well, that's very different from myself and a lot of people that I've known all my life.
Yeah, well, it was Noam Chomsky who first talked about the manufacture of consent.
Well, they've been talking about it before Norm too. And,
sure.
And I mean, we had a guy named Frank Little from Oklahoma. He was half Cherokee. He went to California, and then he went up and he got murdered up in Montana. Biggest funeral that ever took place up there. He was a labor organizer. But people in the education system in Oklahoma, even the so-called liberal educators, they don't ever talk about Frank Little or who he was or where he was from or what motivated him in the first place to leave Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of issues that sort of linger in the South and in the Midwest that are largely misunderstood by people in Washington, D.C. and people who live in cities. I appreciate cities. I've been active politically and culturally, environmentally all my life. I don't play into the whole thing. I kind of call MSNBC the placation station. They placate everything political and avoid everything meaningful that we would head off to in the future here most any day. And a lot of people already are. So the avoidance of issues that will lead us into the future is essentially the avoidance machine, the manufactured perception that keeps people tied in a knot over the financial slavery that was shifted That's part of what the Civil War was about.
Yeah, I would say, Bob, that what has happened is that we have moved from manufacturing consent, that is, trying to get everybody on board to invade Iraq, for example, which the news media loyally did for George W. Bush in 2002, 2003.
Most people
from manufacturing consent to ignoring behavior. The media is not talking about what the FCC is doing about net neutrality right now. The media is not talking about what Scott Pruitt is doing to the EPA right now.
Right.
They're not talking about Ryan Zinke.
Little tyrant, petty tyrant.
Oh yeah, this is. But we've gone even beyond manufactured consent to the media becoming, to a large extent, basically the organ. And Bob, thank you for the call on this. The media becoming essentially the organ of the state, and or at least of the administration, and that is not a healthy thing. That is not how the media is supposed to work. I mean, the whole point of the media being the fourth estate is to hold, the three branches of government in check, is to call out Article 1, the legislative branch, when they do wrong, is to call out Article 2, the president, when they do wrong, is to call out the Supreme Court, Article 3, when they do wrong. The fourth estate is all about that. I mean, I get it that the phrase fourth estate goes back to France and all that, but I view it in that context, that it's like the fourth branch of government, or certainly should be, and it's just I think frankly it's a crisis that it's not. Doug in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind?
Yeah, on 7:60 a.m. out here until the few corporations took over all the radio stations, and I listened to you on the Progressive Voices app. And I met you at a book signing once here in Denver, and I consider you a national treasure. So, thank you very much for all you do.
Thank you. Be careful. Pride goeth before the fall. Right? I'm just me.
Anyway,
what's on your mind?
I had two items. One was I think the unions are missing a huge membership opportunity by not promoting to women that they could help enforce sexual harassment in the workplace.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. It's the job of unions to represent people in the workplace, and so I'm guessing that most sexual harassment claims in a unionized workplace would be routed through the union, unless they're claiming sexual harassment by union officials.
Right. So I don't know. I just think right now, without any unions in our country, basically, or any influence, that that's one thing that I think could really help in the workplace.
Yeah. Very interesting.
The other.
Go ahead, Doug.
Oh, the other item is I'm pissed at Trump because before Obama left office last year, December 15th, I paid $1.94.9 for gasoline, and I just filled up now, and it's at $2.42.9. That's a 25% increase in the cost of my gasoline.
Right, and meanwhile, 25%. Saudi Arabia, you got Prince Mohammed bin Salman now. He's arrested a whole bunch of billionaire Saudis and holding them in the Ritz-Carlton. And a big story about this in the front page of the Financial Times today, that basically these guys are having to turn over 50, 60, 70% of their wealth, of their billions, to the Saudi state, which ran a $79 billion budget deficit last year. And this is because the price of oil is so low. The price of oil has been consistently below or in the neighborhood of $50 a barrel for a couple of years now. And Saudi Arabia can no longer support a multiple billionaire royal families, or royalty associated with the royal family. They can't support it anymore. They don't have the money, and so they're squeezing their very, very rich people to get that money out. And so the lowest oil prices in history. Inflation adjusted and all that kind of stuff. And yet, they're doubling the price of gas in the United States. Guess who's making the money, Doug? It ain't you and me. It is Rex Tillerson's former company and Koch Industries and ExxonMobil and Shell and BP and all of them, spot on. Doug, thanks for the call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to make a rather curious observation that a couple of the women that made allegations against Roy Moore said that their allegations were not politically motivated because they voted for Donald Trump.
That's correct. In fact, I think with one exception, all of them have voted for Donald Trump.
Well, what's curious about this is apparently, I mean, it was well known. What was it? 16 women had made accusations against Trump before the election.
Yes.
Yet these women did not have any empathy for those allegations at the time that they decided, at the time they decided to vote for Donald Trump. Now, this is, I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at them. It's a kind of a greater concept or a greater.
I think what's happening here, Paul, is that the Harvey Weinstein thing, because he was a Hollywood liberal, the right-wing media was enthusiastic about taking his case in front of the American people. And, you know, because historically it had been people like Mel Gibson or whatever. I mean, you know, it had been more, you know, conservative people who were being accused of these things. And Weinstein was this liberal icon, and which made it acceptable in conservative circles for people to speak like this, to, you know, to come out and talk about how they've been abused, basically by men. And so I think right now is actually a very different time than just a year ago, you know, a year and 2 weeks ago, when the election happened. Thoughts?
Well, okay. But I also think that, or at least in my perception, I mean, women need to, we talk all the time about Republicans and certain sectors of the society that don't vote in their own best interest. And I think, you know, part of achieving equal rights is fighting for them yourself. I actually heard an astounding amount of anti-woman rhetoric coming from progressives about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. I got the music playing in my ear, Paul. I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. This is a fascinating piece in The Guardian. What if nature, like corporations, had the rights of a person? And you know, without going through the whole argument, the Te Uruwera Act is a law that was passed in New Zealand back in 2014, 2 years ago, and it extended to a 821 square mile forest the legal rights of personhood. The forest is sacred to the Tuho people, an indigenous group of the Maori, and for them, Te Tura was an ancient and ancestral homeland that breathes life into their culture. The forest is also to them a living ancestor. And this act concludes that Te Uruwera has an identity in and of itself, and thus must be its own identity with all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. Te Uruwera holds title to itself. Now, this is unique to New Zealand. This is brand new, but there are a number of places around the world where Native people, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people believe, and I would say that the Dakota Access Pipeline is an example of this, believe that the land is sacred and is their mother. You know, we came out of the earth. Look at your body. Every single cell in your body is, you know, made in part out of dirt. We are a product of the earth. You know, what was it? Was it John Donne? Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, and the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is earnest, life is real, and the soul is not, and the grave is not its goal. Life, dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul, if I'm remembering my poetry right. And, you know, dust thou art, to dust returnest. There you go, which I think is a paraphrasing something from Proverbs. But in any case, the idea that here in the United States, what we have done, and this is like the absolute pinnacle of Cartesian thinking, right? Of the world is a dead machine thinking that René Descartes brought us back in the 1700s, or the 17th century, excuse me. The pinnacle of that kind of thinking is that something that is not alive, that's a human-made abstraction, a corporation, has the rights of personhood. And they do. The Supreme Court has said this over and over and over again. Corporations are people. Mitt Romney, corporations are people, my friend. But nature is not. Nature, which is alive, does not have the right of personhood, cannot sue or be sued, doesn't have, any legal rights other than this 800 square mile forest in New Zealand, which is, like I said, brand new and expect more to come. So how different would our world be? How different would our country be if before an oil company could go in and rip up the land and inject poisonous water underground to frack out things, if they had to recognize the personhood of that land, the sacredness of that land? How different would it be if the lumber companies, before they clear cut a forest, had to consider all the living things in that forest? And the forest itself is a living organism. How different would it be if nature could have an attorney ad litem the same way that kids in foster care do, or for that matter, just an attorney the same way corporations who are people do, or who are persons, not people? I think this is a great and important idea, so I wanted to share it with you. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us, Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
Well, the House has been voting and is, I believe, still voting, I can't quite tell, on the Republican tax bill. And I call it a Republican tax bill because no Democrat was involved in the crafting of the bill. And as far as we know, no Democrat will vote yes on this bill. The bill will pass. Let me just double-check to make sure the bill is not already passed. I don't believe that it has, but that bill will pass. President Trump was on the Hill and rallied House Republicans. They have passed it. Yes, the House has passed it. So he rallied them. He also called for welfare reform next. But it's not over yet because there are problems in the Senate, as you know, because there are senators who have problems with this bill. So it's not finished yet, and so we'll see what happens. There are new numbers, very briefly, from the Joint Committee on Taxation, showing that beginning in 2021, many families earning under $30,000 annually would face higher taxes under the Senate package.
Right. That's under 30. So if you're making less than $30,000 a year, your taxes will go up as a result of the Republican legislation?
Yes, and by 2027, families making less than $75,000 would face tax boosts, right, while those making more than $75,000 would enjoy lower taxes.
Amazing. And everybody under $75,000, I think that's about the third bracket level, maybe the second, because I don't know if this made it into the House bill or not, the whole chain CPI thing, so that the tax brackets don't go up as fast as inflation, which means that even if you just get raises that keep you at the same level of income you've had for years in terms of purchasing power, your taxes are actually going to go up because of bracket creep.
Okay.
So, yeah, remarkable stuff. Anyhow, what else is going on in the world?
Okay, so a coalition of rights groups launched an online petition today urging IBM to declare that it will not develop technology to help the Trump administration carry out a proposal to identify people for visa denial and deportation from the United States, extreme vetting. So what this is that, as you know, President Trump has pledged to do extreme vetting of certain immigrants, and the rights groups say that the proposals run counter to IBM's stated goals of protecting so-called dreamer immigrants from deportation. and asked about the petition and whether it would work to help vet and deport immigrants. An IBM spokeswoman said the company would not work on any project that runs counter to our company's values, including our long-standing opposition to discrimination against anyone on the basis of gender, religion, sexual orientation, or religion. Now, it goes on anyway. So ICE wants to use machine learning technology and social media monitoring to determine whether an individual is a, quote, positively contributing member of society, unquote, according to documents published on federal contracting websites. And more than 50 civil society groups and more than 50 technical experts have sent a load of letters today to the Department of Homeland Security saying the vetting program was tailor-made for discrimination, and they say that artificial intelligence is unable to provide the information that ICE desires.
This is mind-boggling. How is that different from the old Soviet Union saying you had to be a member of the Communist Party, in other words, morally appropriate and one of us, to get a job? Saddam Hussein, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party to get a job in Iraq. This seems like tin pot dictator stuff.
It is very positively contributing members. So it is disturbing. I didn't know this also. Shortly after the presidential election, several internet firms pledged that they would not help Trump build a data registry to track people based on their religion or assist in mass deportations. I didn't know they did that.
Remarkable.
There's a lot I don't know.
Remarkable.
A third Republican senator may vote against President Trump's controversial nominee to lead the EPA's, the Environmental Protection Agency's, Chemical Safety Office. That would mean that actually one of President Trump's nominees would not get in. Senator Susan Collins told reporters today she's not made a final decision on Michael Durson's nomination, but I think it's safe to say that I'm leaning against him. Her doubt comes a day after North Carolina Republican Senators Tom Tillis and Richard Burr said they would vote against Durson to be the EPA's Assistant Administrator for Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention.
So finally, people are starting to push back against grossly unqualified candidates for federal office?
They are pushing back. Burr and Tillis cited a pair of major chemical safety problems in North Carolina. Water contamination at the Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune and the recent discovery of the as yet unrelated chemical Gen X in the Cape Fear River. They said Durson did not seem to be the right person to take on those problems.
Remarkable. Remarkable. And Trump, of course, is only concerned about industry that might contribute to him and his, well, whatever. Anyhow, what else is up?
A bipartisan group of senators is trying to strengthen reporting to the national background check system in the wake of the mass shooting in Texas earlier this month. And, of course, then there was the Las Vegas shooting at the Country Music Festival. And, of course, we had a rampage in California this week. Senators John Cornyn, Chris Murphy, Tim Scott, and Richard Blumenthal introduced legislation today that would require states and agencies to produce plans for sending records to the National Instant Background Check System that would show if an individual is prohibited from buying a gun and verifying that the information is accurate. And the measure would also try to incentivize agencies and states to provide the information by blocking bonus pay for political appointees in agencies that fail to upload records to the background check system, and rewarding states that follow their implementation plans.
Remarkable. Remarkable. We're hitting the music break here,
okay.
Victoria. I don't think you can hear it, but it's there,
no,
so I gotta run. But thank you for the great news report today.
Thank you.
It's always great talking with you. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. We'll be right back.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our 4th billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our 5th billion only 13 years, 1987. And our 6th billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold. Live and there we go. We are in engineering hell today, but we will push through. We will push through. Steve in Conifer, Colorado. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind? Steve? Where's my phone audio? We don't have phone audio. Okay. I'm going to put Steve on hold just in case he's not talking and see if Jim can hear me. Jim in Westfield, Mass. Jim, can you hear me? Can I hear you, rather? No. Okay. Our engineers are working on the board right now. Our audio board is somehow screwed up. And so I'm just going to go back and rant about some stuff here that I think is, you know, of consequence and you know, frankly, of considerable importance. Let's talk about some science stuff here until we can figure out how to put callers on. If you're on hold, just hang out there. We figured out for a while how to get callers on. We will figure it out again. And by tomorrow, we'll have all this fixed. You know, my sincere apologies, but it's, you know, this is what happens. It's welcome to the wonderful world of live radio. The American Society of Clinical Oncology. I want to share some science stories with you here, just because I'm a total science geek and I love this stuff, and I think you'll find it interesting. And you know, once we get this all shaken out, we can go back to picking up your phone calls. But this is Roni Karen Rabin, R-A-B-I-N, wrote this article back on November 7th in the New York Times. The headline is Cancer Doctors Cite Risk of Drinking Alcohol. And this is amazing. The American Society of Clinical Oncology, which represents many of the nation's top cancer doctors. This is like the trade association for MDs who specialize in cancer, oncologists, is calling attention to the ties between alcohol and cancer. In a statement published Tuesday in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, the group cites evidence that even light drinking, and light drinking, by the way, is 1 glass of wine 2 or 3 times a week. It's not every single night, and it's not multiple glasses of wine, for example, just to use wine as an example, or beers or hard drinks. I mean, it's all the same thing, a drink. I should just say drinks. But I think
for a lot of people, it's a glass of wine at bedtime because we've all been trained that, hey, the French drink wine and, you know, they live long. Well, that turns out it's because of their tax policies. It's because they've got, you know, a high standard of living. It's a good quality of life. So, but the group cites evidence that even light drinking can slightly raise a woman's risk of breast cancer and increase a common type of esophageal cancer. The esophagus, of course, the tube from your mouth to your stomach. And one of the an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the lead author on this statement from the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the ASCO. This lead researcher is Dr. Noel LeConte, and Noel said, the message is not don't drink. It's if you want to reduce your cancer risk, drink less, and if you don't drink, don't start. She says this is somewhat different from tobacco. With tobacco, they say don't even start. Don't take one toke. And obviously the reason for that is that tobacco is 500%, 5 times more addictive than heroin and massively more addictive than alcohol. Right? Most people, you know, they could drink alcohol 2 or 3 days in a row and they're not going to experience delirium tremens and they're not going to experience withdrawal symptoms and all that kind of stuff. You smoke tobacco 3 days in a row, you're addicted. Unless you're that small 2 or 3% of people who have a genetic immunity to nicotine addiction, which is a thing. People who can, what's called chipping, occasionally use it. But with alcohol, you don't have that problem, so it's a whole lot easier to say to people, well, you know, just occasionally, you know, socially, have a drink here and there, or, you know, if there's a particular type of food that goes really well, like, you know, in one of my very favorite combinations is Greek food and Retsina, which is a white wine that is aged in pine casks rather than oak casks. So instead of having a piney flavor or an oaky flavor and a heavy, you know, bouquet and all that kind of stuff, it's got a piney flavor. It smells like pine trees. It tastes like pine trees. And it just goes great with tahini and feta cheese and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, from time to time, have a glass of wine with a meal. But this is, you know, serious stuff. They reviewed earlier published studies and concluded that 5.5% of all new cancers and almost 6% of all cancer deaths can be attributed specifically and only exclusively to alcohol. Now, right now, there's 10,000 airplanes in the sky around the world. If 5% of them fell out of the sky, that would be 500 airplanes, right? If 500 airplanes crashed today, 5% of all the planes in the sky, if 500 airplanes crashed today, all over the world, would you get on an airplane tomorrow? You know, it's funny how we calculate risk. You know, we say, oh, it's only a 5% chance. Yeah. Well, 5% chance of dying in an airplane crash, I wouldn't get on a plane. So why am I drinking alcohol when there's a 5% chance it's going to create a brand new cancer or bring back an old cancer? For women, just one alcoholic drink a day can increase breast cancer risk, according to a report released back in May from the American Institute for Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Fund. That report analyzed 119 studies, including data on 12 million women and over 250,000 breast cancer cases. They looked at this, they looked at it very carefully. And we're talking 12 million women in 119 studies, and they all came to the same conclusion. Alcohol consumption increases the risk of both pre- and postmenopausal cancer, and that drinking a small glass of wine or beer every day, about 10 grams of alcohol, increases premenopausal breast cancer risk by 5%, and if you're postmenopause, it doubles that. It becomes almost doubles it. It becomes 9%. Now, that's just one small glass of wine a day. For a postmenopausal woman, a 9% increase in breast cancer risk. Dr. Clifford A. Hudis, the chief executive of ASCO, said, the more you drink, the higher the risk. It's a pretty linear dose response. So no drinks, no risk. Lots of drinks, lots of risk. And even those who drink moderately which is defined as 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men. Now, keep in mind, light drinking increases the risk of cancer by 5 to 9%. Breast cancer in women. Light drinking, that's like 2-3 times a week having a small glass of wine. Moderate drinking, which for a woman is 1 glass of wine every night before bed, or 1 drink before bed, or for a man it would be 2 drinks. Moderate drinking, defined by the Centers for Disease Control as 1 drink daily for women and 2 for men, face nearly a doubling of the risk of mouth and throat cancer and more than double the risk of squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus compared to non-drinkers. Moderate drinkers also faced elevated risk for cancers of the voice box, female breast cancer, and colorectal cancers. And then you get into heavy drinks. And heavy drinkers are defined as 8 or more drinks a week for a woman, 15 or more for a man. So if as a man you're drinking slightly more than 2 drinks a day, if as a woman you're drinking slightly more than 1 drink a day, the Centers for Disease Control define you as a heavy drinker. Aren't we in our break yet? And thank you. And then you face a 500% increase in the risk of throat and mouth cancers, squamous cell cancers, 3 times the risk of cancers of the voice box or larynx, double the risk of liver cancer, increased risk for female breast cancer, and colorectal cancer. Dr. Hudis says if you look at these figures, you see alcohol as a contributing factor. Certainly it has a causal role. So anyhow, we're hitting a break. We'll be right back.
I thought you touched on something that was very, actually, it sparked just good. It was a good analysis that you had, was that minority groups tend to have a level of compassion that the average white person, or particularly white male, actually lacks.
Right.
And I think that may be one of the reasons that there's not a major revolt from particularly the African American community, but also other minority groups, is because we're always in this constant struggle with trying to get along and have a cooperation and try to convince, the white folks that don't mean harm, but maybe are ignorant to a certain level because they aren't the victim of the white supremacy.
Right, they're blissfully inserted in their privilege.
Exactly. And for me, as an African-American male, sorry to point that out, I know some folks don't like that, but me as an African-American male, going through predominantly white schools growing up, there was one year that I was totally in an all-black school too, but that's a side issue. But going to predominantly white schools and having predominantly white friends, I have noticed that I probably would have been thinking a lot more along the lines of the typical white person because I had to fit in and that's what I knew. But once I got to the age of about 18 and dealt with insanely overt racism from a small percentage of white males, but a very dangerous percentage, even if it's a small amount. I mean, the amount of power that certain police officers have, not most, but I've come across a few of them, and other, I'm sorry to lump them in with white supremacists, but a few of them, they're pretty overt when it's you and when it's a one-on-one situation.
Yep.
And it changes your thinking just literally based on your experience, that you have no choice but to change the way you think. And I'm, sorry for the rant, but...
No, it's an excellent rant, Jay.
I thought I threw that out.
It's an excellent rant, and this is, this is the whole thing about white privilege, is never having to deal with race. It's the biggest bonus for white people of white privilege is that they don't have to think about race, and so they say these stupid things like, I don't think about race, I don't think about color. Well, that's asserting white privilege.
Exactly, and if you walk down the street and somebody else attacks you or approaches you, it's not about what I'm thinking at that moment. It's what is this person thinking about, and why does he have this hostility towards me?
Right.
I have to be aware of that,
Yep.
of that danger. And so I'm forced to think in terms of race, because what I do, my actions can have a detrimental effect to the outcome of my safety or me getting a job or working.
Sure.
Or just
could lead to your death.
Insert any scenario.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Excellent points, Jay. And that was the essence of my point. And this isn't brilliant original thinking on my part at all. There's no shortage of studies that show that the lower a person is on a social or economic power scale, the more empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And the higher somebody is on an economic and power scale, the less empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And it's simply a matter of, it's almost math. It's you know, if you've got that power and you don't have to worry about race, then most people take advantage of that. They don't worry about race, and they use that power.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone. You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your phone calls here. Steve in Conifer, Colorado. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Hey, Steve, what's up? Steve? I heard you. Can you hear me? Steve apparently can't hear me. Let me put him on hold, and let's see if Jim can hear me. Jim in Westfield, Mass. Jim, can you hear me? Jim?
Hello?
Hey, Jim, can you hear me? No, he can't hear me. Oh, that is strange. Okay, Jim, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We've been trying to fix our board as we've been going along, and we've apparently made it worse, or at least in this one area of putting people on calls. So let's go back to geeky science here for a couple of minutes, and hopefully we can fix this by the break at the bottom of the hour, and I'll be able to pick up your calls right after, 32 minutes after the hour. This has been sitting here on my desk since June 26th. I've been intending to do this story. It's been, what, 2 months, 3 months? And I think it's just an amazing, amazing story. It's by Faris Jabbar, J-A-B-R, and it was published in the New York Times on June 26th. The title is "The Solution for Skin Ailments Could Be Right Under Your Nose." And it talks about how, they're talking specifically about acne and eczema. And they point out that for decades, researchers have said, well, people get acne, and acne specifically is the result of a particular type of bacteria. I believe it's Staphylococcus aureus, but I could be wrong. It's it's in the article. I'll find it for you. But in any case, what they did is they found that Staphylococcus aureus, which plays a role in eczema, but healthy people who don't have eczema or acne have high levels of two bacteria in their skin, S. hominis and S. epidermis. And so what they did is they took these two bacteria, Staphylococcus hominis and Staphylococcus epidermis, which are normal, healthy bacteria that grow on our skin that we kill off when we wash ourselves too much. They took those bacteria, they grew them, so they had billions and billions of them. They mixed them in with a skin lotion, Cetaphil lotion, and put it on volunteers' forearms. In other words, just jacked up the number of healthy bacteria that they have on their skin. Within 24 hours, writes Faris Jabbar, the probiotic lotion nearly eliminated Staphylococcus aureus from their skin. So the good bacteria kill the bad bacteria. The researchers were also able to identify some of the compounds that the good bacteria use to kill the bad bacteria, the Staphylococcus aureus. And they're, so the next step, of course, see, if we lived in a normal world, they would say, hey, here's two bacteria, Staphylococcus hominis and Staphylococcus epidermis, that if you put them on people's skin, it nukes eczema and acne. And, they would start growing these bacteria and selling them in lotion, and people can put them on their skin, and they can renew their normal and healthy skin bacteria. But instead, because, we live in a world that is like completely driven by profit, what the researchers are doing are they're going, oh, this is interesting. S. hominis and S. epidermis kill off S. aureus. The two good bacteria kill off the bad bacteria. What's the mechanism of action? What chemical are these good bacteria producing that's causing the bad bacteria to shrivel up and die? How is it happening? Is there a chemical that's breaking down their cell membranes? Is there a chemical that's disrupting their DNA replication? Is there something that is stopping meiosis or mitosis? I guess it is with single cell. No, it's meiosis with single cell with bacteria. Cellular reproduction. What is it? And if they can figure out what that chemical is, and my guess is that it's not one chemical, it's a combination, but if they can, it'll be a cocktail of things that work synergistically with each other, because that's typically how nature works. Excuse me, but their whole goal is to come up with what they call a symbiotic, something that encourages the growth of S. epidermis and thus, kills off another bacteria. This is called P. acnes. Propinobacterium acnes, ACNES, which is, in the theory, one of the things that causes inflammation of the skin, which would include acne. So the combination treatment known as a symbiotic encouraged the growth of this, which in turn reduced the number of P. acnes and the level of inflammation in mice. So, what they're trying to do, the reason that they don't have, in my opinion, the reason that you can't buy this bacteria over the counter right now and just, hey, cure your eczema or acne or whatever it may be, is because they're trying to extract the chemical so that they can sell it in a pill for $20 a pill. Right? I mean, it's that simple. I remember back when I was writing the book Threshold, there's a chapter in there, it's called The Worms. And it's about how people who have intestinal parasites have fewer autoimmune disorders because our immune system Pardon? Oh, we're in the music into the break. Okay, great. Actually, I'll finish up this story on the other side of this. We're going to take a break here in just a moment, and I'll finish my riff, and hopefully we can figure out how to get your calls on the air too. So stick around. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading From Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and Storm for President.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you today. This press release just came out from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which Mark Pocan is the co-chair of, along with Raul Grijalva. The press release says, today, Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chairs Raul Grijalva, Democrat of Arizona, and Representative Mark Pocan, Democrat of Wisconsin, issued the following statement in response to passage of the House Republican tax plan that deeply benefits the wealthy and corporation while raising taxes on millions of working-class Americans. This redistribution of wealth, this is now the statement. It actually starts with what Representative Grijalva said. The vote just happened, by the way, in the House of Representatives. Victoria, about 40 minutes ago or so, said, any minute now this vote is going to happen in the House. We'll see what happens. This redistribution of wealth reaches deep into the pockets of the middle-class working families who drive this economy and create jobs in order to give millionaire takers like Donald Trump and his friends more money at our expense, said Representative Raul Grijalva. Simply put, this bill is a transfer of money to the rich from the rest of us. You know who doesn't need a tax hike? Students, teachers, small business owners, and workers. But that's exactly who's going to pay. That's a tax hike, right? But that's exactly who's going to pay so that millionaires and huge corporations can get a tax cut. Adding insult to injury, Medicare is going to suffer a $25 billion tax cut. This bill may just be the ultimate American betrayal. Representative Mark Pocan says the GOP tax plan even makes the middle class pay for tax breaks for corporations that outsource their jobs to foreign countries. Rather than developing a plan that would expand economic opportunities and strengthen the middle class, Speaker Ryan and House Republicans are further rigging the economy against the American people, said Representative Pocan. Republicans claim they are doubling the standard deduction, but in reality, they eliminated deductions like those for state and local taxes, student loan interest, and medical expenses, raising taxes on 36 million middle-class households. Hundreds of thousands of Speaker Ryan's own constituents rely on these deductions, including many that utilize the state and local tax deduction. So that's where that's at. Sean, do we have any probability that if I put a caller on, we'll be able to hear them? Let's try and see what happens. Jim in Westfield, Massachusetts. Jim, can you hear me? Jim cannot hear me. I'm very sorry, Jim. It's not working. So we will figure this out when we get off the air. And for now, I'm just going to have to rant for a while. So we were talking about skin bacteria just a few minutes ago. This is the same. I mean, this is sort of coming along the back end of this. Actually, there's a new company that actually is offering a live probiotic spray. It's called AOBiome, and that's meant to replenish populations of beneficial skin bacteria. That's interesting. I didn't know about that. So many new potent medicines are right under our nose. He says, genuine microbe-based therapies are not just cocktails or molecules. They contain living organisms that persist and adapt. Dr. Gallo calls this experimental lotion an evolutionarily honed treatment. I think that's just absolutely incredible. So a lot to learn, a lot to know about. There is this in this week's Planet Earth report. This is from the Daily Galaxy, dailygalaxy.com. This is a fascinating one. There is a scientist who is let's see here. His name is Konrad Sosik, PhD. He's a cognitive scientist, professor of philosophy at the University of Technology Rezno in Poland. And he's been thinking a lot about how do you survive a trip to Mars? Or for that matter, living on Mars? It's like you know, this insanely barren landscape. It's 200 degrees below zero at night. It can be, you know, 100 degrees above zero during the day. It's, I mean, we're talking some severe weather extremes. And there's nothing, you know, I mean, you're not going to go out and visit a forest or a field or go, you know, so how do you do this? And he's suggesting that people, if they don't have, well, in fact, let me just share this with this one sentence. It's absolutely brilliant. By 2030, humans are expected to live on Mars. They'll set up agricultural systems on the red planet, oxygen pumping shelters, and experiments, beginning life as a multiplanetary species on a harsh planet where they will very likely develop a mental illness and eventually die. It will not be a pleasant experience. So this guy says that what is needed is a new religion. Let that one sink in for a second. That it's religion that makes life tolerable. And, you know, his working theory is that both once radical and antiquated, introduce a new religion to the children born on Mars. If a new religion arises on its own in Mars, he reasons, all the better. The adults who make up the first wave of colonists will have to bear the burden of implementing this new religion, but will receive none of the benefits of the new religion. However, their initial sacrifice will be what ultimately allows Martian settlements to thrive. Now, why would that be? He says that some theories posit that religion has helped maintain cooperation in society on Earth, and therefore a religion invented and applied to Mars colonists would have the same effect. Instead of Noah's Ark, he says child colonists might learn about a spacecraft, providing them with an origin story that gives purpose to their lives. And this is the key to the whole thing. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? NASA crew members right now, before they take off on all of their trips, now keep in mind, all of the NASA flights to the space station, you know, the manned flights up there are being done by Russia, which, you know, probably will choke MSNBC, but that's it. NASA crew members are blessed by a Russian because, you know, we gave up all that stuff because Ronnie Reagan's tax cuts meant that we could no longer afford to send men or women for that matter, to the moon or to Mars or to even the Soyuz space station. So what do? They have a Russian Orthodox priest bless everybody before they leave. He says, I think we should seriously prepare and equip the future Martian astronauts with an appropriate system that enables coping with stress and fear. Unfortunately, NASA and others think of Mars colonies in terms of nuts and bolts. This is just a fascinating perspective. New research into Greenland, also, the world's second largest ice sheet behind Antarctica. And the big concern is that Greenland is starting to shed its ice in truly extraordinary ways. That are going to, the first cities that they're looking at, the Greenland ice sheet, if it melts much faster, could be really, really impinging seriously are London and New York. London has already built large barriers on the Thames River and some in the ocean. And I mean, they're getting ready for this. The UK is getting ready for this. London is getting ready for a rise in sea levels. New York, not so much. I mean, you know, Bill de Blasio doesn't have that kind of money. New York doesn't have that kind of money. These have to be federal projects, like they are in London. But the federal government doesn't even recognize that climate change is happening, so it's unlikely that you're going to get the money to make something like that happen. Conspiracy theorists are electrified about a rumored national power outage. In an interesting coincidence, the U.S. Department of Defense will simulate a catastrophic national power outage. This was a week or so ago, actually, that they were doing this. So, and Alex Jones was tweeting that this is some sort of a giant conspiracy. Right? Okay. A few other stories here that I think are really, really worth sharing. Saul Hansel in the New York Times. This was back April 3rd, 2009. No, I didn't just come across this story. I ranted about this story in 2009 at some length. But I bring it up right now because the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, the director of the FCC, and Donald Trump and Mike Pence, they want the big corporations who provide internet to your home to be able to censor that internet. They want those companies to be able to say that their content will come to you faster, other people's content will come to you slower, and if, say, your internet service is being provided by Acme Internet Company, and somebody sets up a Acme Internet Company sucks.com website, that they can even block it. So you don't even see messages that might be from people offering cheaper internet services or just saying, hey, the service in this company really sucks. It's amazing what they're planning on doing. So back in 2009, Saul Hansel wrote this piece about the state of the internet in the United States and around the world. The headline, the title of it is World's Fastest Broadband at $20 per Home. And he says, he writes, if you get excited about the prospect of really, really fast broadband internet service, here's a statistic that will make your heart race or your blood boil or both. Pretty much the fastest consumer broadband in the world is the 160 megabit per second service offered by J.com, the largest cable company in Japan. You know how much they charge for 160 megabit service in your home? $20 a month. Excuse me, that's how much the company had to invest to upgrade its network to provide that speed, $20 a month. By contrast, Verizon is spending an average of $817 per month to wire neighborhoods for its Fios cable network, and another $700 for equipment. We'll come back to this in just a second. We're going to take a break here. We'll be right back. Keep in mind, Donald Trump is basing most of his campaign on the fact that wages have been stagnant for 35 years. And he's saying it's because of Mexico. It's because of China. It's because of our trade deals. Well, to some extent it is, but it's also, and in fact, according to these guys at the Economic Policy Institute, largely because of the loss of unions in the United States, which is, the cornerstone of Reaganism. Destroy the unions, you destroy the funding mechanism for the Democratic Party, and they'll have to start getting in bed with banksters, which is exactly what happened. So anyhow, and so you would think that, if Trump really wants to restore the American dream and bring back the American prosperity we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that he would be saying, hey, we need to go back to 35% unionization instead of the 6 or 7% we have right now in the private sector. Of course, he's not talking like that because he's a Republican. I mean, you just heard Harry Truman on this. So here are the key findings of the report. 1, for non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013. This is the last year that they had numbers for that they could really crunch well. But it's, you can extrapolate it to today. For non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013 if private sector union density remained at its 1979 level. For a year-round work, in other words, union density, number of people who are union members in the workforce. For a year-round worker, this translates to an annual wage loss of $2,700. For the 40 million non-union private sector men, the loss is equivalent to $2.1 billion fewer dollars in weekly paychecks, which represents an annual wage loss of $109 billion, just slightly more than the net wealth of the Koch brothers. I added. For non-union private sector men without a bachelor's degree or more education, non-college graduates, weekly wages would be an estimated 8% higher in 2013 if union density remained at its 1979 levels. For a year-round worker, this translates into an annual wage loss of over $3,000. And they continue through the list. It's taking out these various slices of people. The degree of non-union wage decline reflects how much unionization has declined since 1979 among private sector men by 2/3, from 34% to 10%. That 10% includes government employees. Among women by more than 1/3, from 16% to 6%. and especially among non-college degree men by more than 2/3 from 38 to 11%. As unions have receded from the private sector, their effect on the wages of non-members percent of unionization has declined. And this is they go through more of the details and all this stuff, but this is something I have been pointing out since we started this program 13 years ago, that for every good union job in an economy, there's always a parallel non-union job that basically has the same wages and benefits because the unions set the floor. And as you destroy the unions, you destroy the floor. And now working people in the United States are basically falling through the floor. Wages have been flat since Reaganomics really took hold in 82, 83, 84. And they've actually declined, in particular for non-college educated men and for women since that time.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Okay, welcome back. Now I can talk. All right, I'm going to try this just one more time, but I don't think it's going to work. And in which case, I'm going to ask everybody on hold to just call back tomorrow. But Jim in Westfield, Mass, can you hear me, Jim? No, can't hear me. Just to make sure, Jack in Viola, Wisconsin. Jack, you can't hear me either, right? Hey, Jack. I can hear you, but you can't hear me. My apologies. We've got a couple of engineers here. We're working on this like crazy right now. Something blew up our board yesterday, and we're going to get it fixed by the end of the day, but probably not by the next 5 minutes at the end of the show. So if you're on hold, you might want to drop off because I can't put you on the air. It's unfortunate, but we've got this engineering problem. So anyhow, back to the world's fastest broadband at $20 a home. Michael Fries, the chief executive of Liberty Global, the American company that operates JCOM, which is this company in Japan that was able to offer 160 MIP broadband service to homes in Japan at the cost to the company, a one-time cost of $20 per house, whereas the cost to Verizon is $800 per house here in the United States. And what this guy says is that this isn't rocket science. This isn't that expensive. As Saul Hansel writes, the experience in Japan suggests that the major cable systems in the United States might be able to increase the speed of their broadband service by 5 to 10 times right away. And they might not need to charge much more than they do right now, and they still make just as much money. So the question then becomes, will they do it? Are the internet companies in America? See, in Japan, the internet companies actually have competition. In the United States, no. In Japan, like France, like the rest of Europe, says, oh, you want to be an internet service provider? That's fine. You want to provide via, cable or fiber or whatever to people's homes to be able to get internet service? Well, that's fine. But you have to allow other internet service providers to provide internet to people over the cable that you just ran into their house. You can charge them for the cable, and then so the bill that you get from your internet company in these other countries functionally works like this. Say it's a $20 a month bill, $10 a month of that goes to the company that actually ran the cable into your house, $10 a month goes to the company that you chose to be your internet service provider. Just like in the old days when we used to connect over our telephone systems to the modem, to dial up, it used to be 300 baud, then 1200 baud, then 600 baud, then 1200 baud, then 2400 baud, then 9600 baud. It got faster and faster and faster, but we'd take the headset and set it on the acoustic coupler, and boom, you've got internet. And you could log on to AOL, or you could log on to CompuServe. You could use any internet service provider you wanted. Well, that all went away in the United States. Not in the rest of the world, but that all went away in the United States when the cable companies said, we want exclusivity. If I'm Verizon and I'm providing the internet service into your home, I don't want anybody else to be able to offer you internet service. See, the business model in the United States is always monopoly. Has been for centuries. This is why in the 1920s, the woman who invented the monopoly game did so. Wanted to point out to people that monopoly is always destructive, both to society and culture and to the businesses themselves. So pricing at Liberty varies widely by market. In Japan, they charge $60 a month for 160 MIPS. Their basic service is 30 MIPS, which is $55 a month. In the Netherlands, they charge $170 for 120 MIPS, or 60 euros for 60 MIPS, $81. He says our margins go up, but we're delivering more value. So why not in the United States? Well, he writes there's very little competition in areas not served by Verizon's Fios system, which will soon offer 50 MIPS service. And some argue there isn't much demand for super high-speed internet. Right. The big companies aren't giving it to us because we don't want it. Right. Mr. Freeze added another fear. Other cable operators, he said, are concerned that not only will prices fall, but that the superfast service will encourage customers to watch video on the web and drop their cable service. Something that Louise and I just recently did. When we moved to Portland, we did not connect a television service to our house. To the extent that we watch television, you know, we did a subscription to one of the online TV services. In our case, it was Sling, but I'm not recommending them, over anybody else, although I think that they may be the only one that's actually really doing this right now. But there will be other competition and stuff like that coming along. And so now, I'm sucking lots of internet out of this pipe, out of the internet pipe. And the internet companies, their whole business model, they'll wire a neighborhood and they'll say to everybody in that neighborhood, oh, you've got 20 MIPS of download, 20 megabits of download. You're in great shape. And they say to everybody, you've all got 20 MIPS of download. And in aggregate, it might be, 5 terabytes, right? 5 trillion bytes of data, that passes through every whatever, hour or something like that, that they have sold. But they only provision it for 2 terabytes or 1 terabyte. Now, how do they get away with that? Well, 90%, it's called breakage. 90% of people who use their internet service don't continuously download large amounts of data. So if you're my neighbor and you're not using your internet, I am, hey, it all evens out. But here's the problem. If everybody in the neighborhood starts disconnecting the TV service and says, I'll get my TV online. I'm going to start watching the networks on their websites, or I'm going to I'm going to sign up with one of these services that basically is, TV on the internet. And it's at that point when more and more people start doing what I did and just dumping TV altogether, cable TV, and saying we're only going to go to the internet. This is exactly why the internet companies, many of whom, Comcast is probably the most conspicuous in this regard, are also cable TV providers, want the FCC to blow up net neutrality so that they can rewire the internet on a cable TV model. So they can say to you, oh, you want to be able to go visit your basic service is going to cost you $50 a month. But if you want to be able to go visit the websites, the New York Times, the Washington Post, your basic news services, we've got a news package for an additional $5 a month. You can visit those sites. Oh, you want streaming video? Well, that'll be an extra $10 a month. You want to watch YouTube? That'll be an extra $5 a month. Oh, you want to visit porn sites? That's an extra $20 a month. You want to watch the sports ESPN? That's an extra $5 a month. Whatever. They want to do the cable model for the internet. So they can put smart routers in your house so they can block content to you unless you pay them. And they're trying to have these two things overlap. So as cable TV collapses and the internet starts replacing it, at that crossover point, that's the point where Ajit Pai says, okay, we're going to blow up net neutrality, because as the internet becomes the principal carrier of video, of television into our homes, they want to be able to flip their business model. So it's no longer just $50 a month no matter how much you use, but now it's going to be $50 a month basic service, plus $50 a month for what you use, plus $20 a month because you used a news site, plus $10 a month because you used a video site, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is their business model. This is where they're going. We'll see you tomorrow. Don't forget, democracy begins with you. Tag your it. We'll see you tomorrow.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.